Welcome to Dead Giveaway, the podcast where we dive deep into the world of plan giving. I'm your host, Matt Treadwell. Join me as I sit down with inspiring professionals who are shaping legacies and making a lasting impact, one gift at a time. Let's dig in.
Dave Libengood, and until about 4 weeks ago, I was the Chief Client Relationship Officer at TIAA Caspic, which I think most of your listeners know is a firm that invests and administers life income gifts. And for the last 15 years or so, I've been leading the portion of the firm that's involved with relationship management and client consulting.
Before you got into philanthropy, what were you doing?
Well, if you go back far enough, my first exposure to philanthropy and plan giving was way back in the summer of 1982. I was between the 2 years of my master's in business administration program and was looking for internship employment. But particular time in 1981 to 1982 was a pretty rough time in the economy here in the United States. Inflation and unemployment were both in double digits. And my undergraduate major was viola performance, and music was all over my resume. So I couldn't find any internship opportunities through my grad school placement office. But I was blessed to find an internship, believe it or not, in plan giving the Christian Science Church World headquarters in Boston. And it was a wonderful internship in the sense that there were 2 to 3 weeks in each of 4 areas that I was able to work. One was in plan giving. I was doing things like helping to prepare written responses to mailing inquiries and advertising inquiries. Of course, there weren't any PCs in 1981. Or at least not sophisticated ones. So it was an ancient word processing system. And then I spent a couple of weeks in trust administration where I was doing things like researching trust transactions on microfiche. And then a couple of weeks in estate administration oversight where I was doing things like digesting probate accountings. And then a couple of weeks with the investment team at the church. And I don't really remember what I was doing with them, but what I remember was lots of excitement because the Federal Reserve began to lower interest rates in the August of 1982, and it was the beginning of a decades-long bull market for stocks in the United States. So I my exposure there kind of fell in love with this huge variety of intellectual stimulus that was in the plan giving field. You had income tax law, you had gift and estate tax law, fiduciary law, personal financial planning, investments. And so I then finished my MBA and I got a job doing commercial lending to smaller sized companies at a bank called Comerica Bank in Michigan. And I did that for a few years. And what I loved about that was learning about the businesses that I was lending to, what made some businesses successful and other businesses not so successful. But I also realized that I was selling a commodity, money. The tiniest difference in price, that means the interest rate on your loan, could sometimes mean losing business relationships that you had invested in for a long time. So after a few years, I saw an ad about an investment position back at the church. So this was 1986. I applied for that position, but someone else remembered, wasn't this guy the summer intern from Michigan that was in plan giving a few years ago? And so the bottom line, I ended up joining the church's plan giving staff in the mid 1980s. Then I learned to love even more than that intellectual variety of all those disciplines was the opportunity to work with donors in ways that helped them to accomplish not only their philanthropic objectives, but to solve family and personal financial planning problems as well. And I thought this is really cool stuff. So anyway, I continued to work at the church for 15 years and then joined Caspic in 2001. So it's been a long career in plan giving, and I have just loved it. in so many ways.
You majored in viola is one of the most fascinating things that I think I knew about you. Were you able to take any of the lessons you learned from majoring in a musical instrument and apply that to your career in fundraising?
Well, certainly not in terms of subject matters, but playing a musical instrument takes an enormous amount of dedicated effort towards a goal. So that, I think, is useful for musicians no matter what career they might go into. And there's also the idea of performing in front of others, very different. I always felt it was much, much easier to speak in front of an audience than it was to perform on a musical instrument in front of an audience. But maybe that's because I did so much of the former or the performing, on a musical instruments before I was involved with speaking. Maybe that made the speaking a whole lot easier. I'm not I'm not sure.
You were in corporate banking and then you switched over to fundraising. How was that transition?
I feel like certain aspects of my prior jobs were preparing me for later jobs. Because even though it was very different, nonetheless, we're working with people about financial transactions and needing to interview people. So I felt like that job in commercial lending prepared me quite well to work with individuals to understand what they were trying to accomplish. And also just I enjoyed very much working with people. But, as a transition, I alluded to this earlier that in commercial lending, ultimately, you are, selling a commodity. And so it wasn't as intellectually challenging as I found working in plan giving because of that variety of disciplines that I talked about before. In that sense, I enjoyed plan giving more. It was more intellectually challenging, whereas I think commercial lending was about building relationships, but didn't quite satisfy that stimulus. I can remember when I first applied for the position at the church, it was actually an investment position that I applied for. And I applied for that because I thought it would use my analytical skill set more. And I was missing that in commercial lending. So it was fine. It was a bigger transition personally because we left Michigan and moved to Boston. This was the mid 1980s. And at that point, the housing market was hugely more expensive in Boston than it was in Michigan. So that part was kind of hard. But the transition in terms of the job was fine. Yeah, it wasn't a concern at all. I I felt like I was progressing.
That's good. When you made the move from playing giving to Caspic, how about that transition? Because you went private sector, public, and then kind of like technically private, still working for public though, right?
Yes, that all started because the church hired Caspic to handle certain aspects of its plan giving program in 1994. So there was a period of time while I was still at the church and was a Caspic client, got to know the firm quite well and a lot of the people in the firm quite well. And then in 2001, I ended up joining TIA Caspic, but I was kind of doing some of the same things that I was doing at the church, both in terms of working with donors, although I didn't work directly with the donors. I was kind of helping our clients think through how they might approach donor conversations or proposals or answering technical questions about unusual gift structures or unusual assets. So I was still very close to a lot of those disciplines that I was talking about. But what I was one step removed because I was a consultant to the folks who were on the front lines with the donors, but I still loved it a lot. And then some of the consulting too was not about just the actual gift planning, but what we call program management consulting at Caspic, which grew over time from things like policy development, gift acceptance policies, risk management, such as with a gift annuity pool, to peer benchmarking. We do a lot of that with our clients, TIA Caspic. And so it was kind of like, I have a good friend who joined Caspic later and said it was kind of like going for your PhD in plan giving. And I would say yes. I mean, if you liked plan giving, then Caspic was kind of an opportunity to deepen that in a way that was helping a lot of clients to, improve their programs and raise money for their institution. So why wouldn't you like that? So that's why I found Caspic so appealing. That and the culture at Caspic and the colleagues that I had at Caspic, it was a fantastic experience. That's why I stayed there for almost 25 years.
And so one of the things you said was kind of interesting, and I'm curious about this. When people talk about their time in plan giving and when they're working in plan giving, almost without fail, the thing we all enjoy the most is the donor experience, working directly with donors. When you go to some place like Caspic and you take that step and you put a barrier between you and the donors, how do you still find the same passion for it, or is it just a passion for a different aspect of it?
I never thought of it as a barrier, although because sometimes we were brought in with our clients. We would always do that with them, but they would sometimes ask us to join conversations with donors, which was lots of fun. And so you had some of that same gift planning exposure, but you also had the challenge and joy of helping them solve problems in their programs. I saw it as yet a further extension of the scope of my work, if you will. Now, there are some people I know who really want to be on the front lines with the donors, and I certainly understand that and respect that. But I always found it to be just a joy to be able to help clients as well and to see them succeed, and especially if they were developing a capability that they didn't really have before. I just really enjoy that. It's kind of like, I suppose, if I'd had 9 lives like a cat, one of them would have been in teaching somewhere, because I just enjoy that so much, teaching and mentoring.
Retirement job, right?
Yeah. We'll see what happens.
Uh, cool. So tell me about, I guess, a little bit more about your time at Caspic, because when you got there, it was not TIAA Caspic, it was just Caspic. So you were there, you saw the mergers. How did that impact your work there? And how did you enjoy those changes or dislike them, or anything that you can say now that you're retired?
Well, there are always challenges when you are running a business, and especially if you're hoping to be successful and grow that business over time. So I joined Caspic in 2001, and at that time it was called Caspic and Company. I had been a client for 5-6 years before that, so I knew the organization quite well. That made it an easy transition, by the way. I felt like I knew the people. I knew what the job was like, because I was on the receiving end of that work, if you will, when I was at the church. So you have challenges when you're a business and you're small and you don't have access to as many resources as if you're owned by a large financial services company, which we were eventually acquired by TIAA in 2006. So I had about 5 years when we were a small business, and the principal owners of the firm were Scott Caspic and his wife, Susan Trammell, and there were a couple of other owners too. And then after we were acquired, I mean, one of the first things that happened, so many of our clients would come to conferences and say to senior people who were at TIAA when they were there, "We love the way things are at Caspic. Please don't mess it up." And, many, many different transitions occurred over the 15 years that elapsed from when we were acquired by TIAA and when I retired. And there are advantages. You have so many more. You have access to other resources that you didn't as a small company. And yet you also have to figure out how does this small business, which has a very particular niche, fit into a much, much larger business? Those of you out there who know TIAA know that it's a large provider of retirement services to the not-for-profit community. It's also heavily involved in investment management through an acquisition of Nuveen, which occurred in, I think, 2014, 2015. So there are always challenges in running a business, but hey, that's what makes life and jobs interesting.
Can we take a step back and go back to your time with the church? When you were there, were you the whole time an individual contributor, or did you build a program and have people under you? What did that look like?
I started as a plan giving officer and held that job for 2 years, 3 years or so. And then I was asked to do some other things in trust administration. One of the things that I was asked to do, which was an incredible opportunity, was to take notes at the church's investment committee meetings, because the same investment committee that oversaw the church's own funds and endowments also oversaw the planned giving investments, which at that time were done internally at the program. So, and what I loved about this, all of this, by the way, was in the same organizational unit at the church. So I had the ability to learn about working with donors to set up new gifts, to handle trust administration issues that might come up. They don't come up often, but they do. And also to learn about the investment of life income gifts. So again, there was this wonderful variety that I just considered I was just really fortunate to have this opportunity. And so I was a part of the teams that evaluated providers both in 1989 and in 1994. And it was in the 1990, well, actually late 93, but that search where the church decided to hire Caspic and Company. And that was kind of a risky move at that point. Here this was, Caspic was a firm that was only 5 years old. And there were people who would say, you're going to entrust the administration and investment of the church's planned giving program, which was quite large, to this firm that's only 5 years old. And it's, what happens if the founder gets hit by the truck or whatever. So it was seen by some as a risky move. We didn't see it that way because we felt that there was a strong alignment between the way we thought about what added value to a planned giving program and what the principles of Caspic were thinking at the time. And these were people we knew quite well. So that was, it was an easy transition. I was not the first to leave the church and move to Caspic. Someone named Alan Corthals, who was my manager at the church, he left in 1997 and went to the church. I came in 2001. In between, there was someone on our investment staff at the church named Connie Cork, who took a job in investments at Caspic. And then later, there were even others who went elsewhere first in planned giving jobs that ended up joining Caspic. So there's a long association there between the Christian Science Churches program and TIA Caspic.
It sounded like you had a lot of opportunities to try a lot of things. And I guess that was one of the things that you said drew you to the church, was you felt like you weren't being intellectually stimulated as a corporate banker, right? So that
Yes.
kind of allowed you to scratch all those itches of intellectual stimulation, right?
Yes. At Caspic, I became a relationship manager where I was working with a group of assigned clients, consulting on their planned giving programs. I did that for a total of 9 years, I guess, would be before I was made. And we were growing as a firm. There were other things that needed to be done. Alan was moving into some different roles. And so beginning about 2010, the relationship management team that does all of this consulting with our clients, as well as some others, technical consultants, but they began reporting to me. So for the last 15 years of my time at Caspic, I was responsible for the activities of the relationship management team. And then eventually also for our technical consulting group and our client communications. So as my career expanded, I had the opportunity to get involved with other areas in the firm. And then for the last 5 years or so, as a member of the firm's senior leadership team. So it was a wonderful career opportunity. And I think one of the things that I enjoyed a tremendous amount beginning in 2010 is when when the relationship management team was reporting to me, and there were challenges there. There were people who went and did other things. Some of them wanted to go back into fundraising because they missed working directly with donors. They missed the not-for-profit aspect of it. But it was just a wonderful opportunity to work with so many high-quality individuals. That is one of the most precious parts of my time at Caspic, is working with my colleagues, as well as clients. As I said before, I used to call them the 3 Cs: working with colleagues, working with clients, and the Caspic culture were the things that were always so attractive, and it kept me there for 25 years.
As you're progressing up in your career, maybe getting a little bit further away from the everyday work of playing giving, you stayed very interested and involved with playing giving because that's part of the work. But is that also during the time when you decided to create your own playing gifts?
It was, although I would say there were some different motivations there. And the one thing I will say is one of the things that Scott Caspic and Abby Mason and Alan Corthall, some of the individuals who were senior at Caspic when I first went there, were big on was, even though you're members of senior management, you retained client relationships for a small number of clients. So even when I left 4 weeks ago, I still was the relationship manager for 3 client relationships. That was true across most of these people and seniors. And Scott Caspic felt very strongly that management needed to stay close to its clients. And if you weren't really on the front lines working with them on a regular basis, then you wouldn't necessarily have that depth of understanding of what clients need, and that it would pay off in terms of your ability to win new clients and stay abreast of what was really going on in the industry on the ground, you know, not just what you hear at conferences, but what are the challenges that clients are facing. So there was that aspect of it. Sorry to digress a little bit there. As far as my wife and I deciding to establish some charitable remainder trusts, how did that come about? Well, one thing that happened was that we've been thinking about it for a long time. You know, maybe we should establish a charitable remainder trust because it could give us some additional flexibility with retirement income. And we don't have children. So we had been thinking, well, what happens when we're both gone? And had charities that when we wanted to benefit. One of them was the Christian Science Church. And so then in early, I think 2021 it was. So that was the sort of long-term reason for establishing a CRT, which was combining our estate plan with retirement income. And then in early 2021, there was some mention in the Department of Treasury's Green Book about potential legislation that said we should tax capital gains to donors upon their contributions of appreciated property to CRTs. And when I read that, I was kind of shocked. And I know many commentators saw that as being highly unlikely. They didn't think that would ever come into law because they just didn't think enough people would get behind it. But, we just had the pandemic. Things felt kind of uncertain. And we thought, well, why not move forward with this idea when we know it's still available? And so we used Appreciated Securities to establish a charitable remainder unit trust with the church in the fall of 2021. And of course, we also like the fact that not only retirement income, it's going to go where we want it to go, and we get an income tax deduction for a portion of the contribution. And then along about the same time, during the pandemic shutdown, the School of Music, Theater, and Dance at alma mater, which is the University of Michigan, invited me to a live stream event for about 10 to 15 regular donors. So this was a really small live stream event, just 10 to 15 donors, of which we were two. Donors to a chamber music program at the school. I had been supporting that chamber music program through modest annual fund gifts for a couple decades, really. But at this live stream event, there were student performers, there were interviews with their string professors and their chamber music coaches and more. This was, I think, March of 2021. And I believe we'd been living through 12 months of a shutdown without a lot of human contact and no in-person musical events. And so I remember just having tears streaming down my face during that online event. And there was a very good major gift officer at the school who then approached us about endowing a chamber music prize at the School of Music, Theater, and Dance. And we said yes, but we were happy for the prize to be named after a chamber music professor that I had when I was a student there in the late 1970s. His name was Gustave Roseils, and he had a really significant impact on my life. And maybe more so than, I mean, yes, I was the violist in a string quartet that studied with Mr. Roseils. And he was great not only as a chamber musician, but he was just so supportive, and he cared about his students, not just in the playing of music, but in how they were developing as individuals and what kind of challenges they had and how he might be able to help. And it was that guidance and encouragement and kindness that really made an impression upon me. He helped our quartet get the opportunity to study in master classes with the Juilliard String Quartet. And I can remember entering at least one chamber music quartet contest, which we happened to win, but this was not anything that had any great monetary prize to it. But it was so much fun. So this man loved teaching and he loved his students. And so I was very happy. The prize is called the Gustave Roseils Prize, Endowed Prize in String Quartet. And, he was part of a very famous quartet that most people here not that many people can name string quartets, but even those who can name string quartets may not have heard of the Paganini Quartet, which was started in the 1940s. He was the original second violinist in that quartet. And it was named the Paganini Quartet because they performed on a set of Stradivarius instruments, 2 violins, viola, and cello, the 4 instruments in a string quartet, that were all owned at one point by the very famous 19th century violin virtuoso, Niccolò Paganini. And so a wealthy patron had purchased these instruments in the 1940s specifically to make them available to the Paganini Quartet. And so that was Gustave Roseils' background. But again, what really made us move, was moving me about was Gustave Roseils' love of his students as well as love of music. So it's long story short, because I'm getting too long here. In 2023, we established a second CRT, this time at the University of Michigan, that will eventually benefit the School of Music, Theater, and Dance, including the Roseils Chamber Music Prize. And we, of course, continued the annual fund support and also recently added to the endowed fund as well, because I said recently to a new major gift officer, if we make a gift to the endowed fund, then it's enhances the prize now instead of waiting until after the trust terminates, which we hope will be many years into the future. We're not planning on going anywhere. So anyway, we ended up establishing 2 charitable remainder trusts in that for those reasons that I just described. So yeah, and I'm enjoying it very much.
And so being someone that's been both a fundraiser in playing giving and someone that has created 2 charitable remainder trusts, are there things about the process of setting those up that made you think, oh, I would have done this differently? Or did you even go to them like, hey, this is the plan that's going to happen? Or did you let the gift officer kind of walk through that process?
Well, again, the first thing we did, and I may have misspoke, the first thing we did was we established the endowed fund. That was in 2021, I think. I may not be remembering the exact years, and so it was later that I went to the director of gift planning at the University of Michigan and said, we'd like to do a CRT. And yeah, I think that part was easy because we kind of told her what we wanted to do. And it was fine. They were very capable. And so the only thing I can remember discussing much about it was how it would be invested, whether it was going to be in the university's endowment or in a separate portfolio. We chose a separate portfolio because the payments are taxed so much more efficiently to us with a separate portfolio that's managed with tax efficiency in mind than being invested in the endowment, although the endowment is, I'm sure, has done well at the University of Michigan. So it was, it was an enjoyable interaction, both with the church and with the university and setting them up. But we kind of had unlike some donors who don't know for sure what they want to do or they don't understand much about the vehicles, we did. So it was kind of like, this is what we'd like to do, and they were happy to help us do it.
Okay. And then, so I guess next thing that I want to seamlessly transition to is what has been some of the more interesting gifts that you've seen. What pick one of the most interesting gift that you've seen in your time?
That's really, really hard because seeing, whether I worked on it personally when I was a plan giving officer or working with our clients, and there have been so many hundreds and hundreds of gifts. So it's kind of difficult to pick one and say, oh, that was the most interesting gift. There are lots of examples of working on unusual gift assets. A lot of real estate. Real estate is a really good asset for contributing to charitable remainder trusts. So everything, but also other kinds of unusual assets, everything from fishing trawlers to collections of books published in Africa and a long time ago, published in Africa, like 1800s or things, that kind of things, to lots of, as I say, lots and lots of gifts of real estate. So the one that I remember maybe the most is the one that didn't go so well. The very, very first charitable remainder trust I remember working on at the church, I had a donor who wanted to contribute residential real estate that I think he had probably used as a rental property, but he wanted fixed income. And at that time, this is in early 1987, there were no flip trusts. They didn't exist, or at least they weren't recognized under the tax law. But he wanted fixed income, and the church did not issue gift annuities for real estate. So I knew, for example, that you needed to fund a charitable remainder annuity trust at once. You could not make additions. And I knew that there would be carrying costs. So I figured, well, that's not so bad. This donor had the means to add cash, maybe it was marketable securities, I really don't remember, to the annuity trust on the same date as the real estate was funded. So I figured, oh, I've got this covered. And we added enough, we thought. But then not that anybody of your listeners would know, but in 1987, there was a real estate recession in New England. This was a New England a piece of real estate. And so it took a lot longer for that real estate to sell. And it sold at a reduced price. And there was a lot of somewhat sleepless nights on my part. But I was rescued by an amazing donor who had very high donative intent. The gift was rescued by it. So was my self-image. And because I can remember him at one point, this was after it had sold, and he would ask me every year, what did the trust actually earn and what did it make payments out to me? And he said, can I just add that back to the trust? No, you can't. You can't make an addition to the annuity trust. So he would just make outright gifts to the church for the difference between what the trust earned and what it paid out to him. That's what I mean by amazing donative intent. That saves so many gifts. So I never, ever did another CRAT funded with real estate, including, I'm sure that some of our clients probably did somewhere along the line. But and now, of course, we have the whole flip charitable remainder trust, which is a much better situation, but we didn't have that opportunity in the mid 1980s.
You just said flip charitable remainder trust wasn't an option in the mid 1980s?
No, that did not come along until the mid 1990s. And it was started by an individual. The idea was name was David Donaldson. He was with Robson Gray in Boston at the time. And he said, I don't see where there's anything in the tax law that says You can only be a net income trust or a standard unit trust, and you can't shift from one to the other. And then there were some private letter rulings, and eventually, around the end of the 1990s, we came up with what we have today, which is the flipped charitable remainder unit trust. But yeah, it did not exist back then. So yeah, it's interesting.
That's crazy. Do you foresee anything like that coming at any time in the near future? A gift vehicle that's just kind of been sitting there staring us in the face that we've been missing?
Well, maybe. I think we all wish that could be a flip CRAT, that you could have it be a net income unit trust, and then on the flip, instead of it turning to a standard unit trust, have it turn to a CRAT. You'd have to decide upon the annuity payment amount. And, ironically, it's probably because it's very difficult to value that remainder interest that may be one reason why that's never come out. But, well, we've had some clients do what we sometimes have referred to as a flip deferred gift annuity. That's not anything that's been formally approved by the IRS, even in a private letter ruling, but we don't see anything that would keep somebody from doing that. So it's like a deferred flexible gift annuity, but you could have it a situation where it would actually start its payments on the occurrence of some event. I'm not sure there's any reason why that couldn't work, but I don't know whether there'll be anything else like that. I'm not that prescient to know whether something else will be coming down the pike, but it would be nice because there are some situations that would be very attractive to a lot of donors.
And before we run out of time, thank you so much for the time you've been with me today. The last thing we ask almost everyone, who in your phone would you love to hear on the podcast?
Well, again, I think there are lots of individuals, boy, and I hesitate to name names because then somebody will say, well, why didn't you mention me? So why don't I do this? We'll talk about that separately. I'll give you a list.
Sounds great. That sounds great.
Yes.
All right. Well, again, thank you so much for your time. It's been a pleasure. I have always enjoyed getting to talk to you when you come to Indiana. Thank you so much.
Okay. Take care, Matt. Bye.
Thank you for joining us on Dead Giveaway, where every gift tells a story. A big thank you to Dave Libengood for taking time out of a busy retirement to share with us his reflections on his career. Join us next month when we are joined by Joel Bull, founder and principal of Philanthropy Advisory Council and 2025 National CGP Hall of Famer. None of this would be possible without my amazing producer, Jessica Hall, and the support of the entire National Association of Charitable Gift Planners staff. If you enjoyed today's conversation, please share the show and subscribe so you never miss an episode. Thanks again for listening to Dead Giveaway, where generosity lives on.